Welcome back to Prep for Calc. Yesterday, I believe we did 4 new topics. What were they? Something to do with trig, maybe. Given like a single trig function value, find the rest, potentially, something like that. And given the quadrant that it's located in, that's one of them. Or find some other trig values from that. Maybe 2 things on logarithms. What would they have been? Combining like a logarithmic expression into a single logarithm. So that is like if a number is being multiplied by a logarithm, it's actually the same as logarithm to whatever that thing, the argument of the logarithm being to that exponent. If you multiply them together, same base, you can take the arguments and multiply them or add them together, and subtract them would be division. There's another thing on logarithms, basically solving an exponential equation by rewriting as a logarithm, I think. And then the last thing would have been about what, functions maybe? Not graphing any functions. I don't know what that last thing would be. Would have been inverse functions. And what is an inverse function? It's like a function that undoes another function. So f of g of x equals x, and I always say g of f of x equals x. You could say that for all in the domain of f, and g of f of x, or g of f of g of y equals y for all in the domain of g. No. What? F of g of y for all in the domain of g. That's right. And then g of f of x for all in the domain of f. All right. Finding values of trigonometric functions given information about an angle. Oh. Yeah. Writing an expression as a single logarithm. Solving exponential equations using logarithms and natural logarithms. All right, I'm going to jump back in, continue learning. I'll be back to recall what I learned in a little bit. All right, what's up? 2 new topics today. One I have not fully completed, but I will finish tomorrow. The first one was on logarithms, and this is what I was kind of stuck on. I know I missed it on the quiz, and this is basically, you've got 2 different powers, 2 different bases to 2 different exponents with variables in the exponent. How do you solve that? Well, basically you can take the log of both sides and use the power property of logarithms to pull down the exponent to being multiplied by the log, and then you can kind of isolate the logs with the the variables in them, and then factor out the variable, and then solve for the variable, exact value. So that's good. The second thing was inverse trig, and this was a little tricky for me, but I've learned a bit. So inverse trig, right? So inverse function, these got clearer, right? Typically you put an input into a function and get an output. An inverse function is basically saying, well, what input do I need to put in to get this output that I'm giving you? Okay? And so the same thing with inverse trig. It's instead of putting in an angle and getting a value, you say, what angle gives me this value? And so basically the 3 inverse trig we learned about so far are arc sine, or the inverse of sine, the inverse of cosine, or arc cosine, the inverse of trig, or arc tangent, or the inverse of tangent, aka arc tangent. And so since these are, right, sine, cosine, tangent are repeating, they're like periodic shapes, you have to restrict the domain or the range, or else you'll have infinitely many values, which isn't a function. So you have to restrict the range. So the range for arc sine has been set to negative pi over 2 over to pi over 2. Tangent is from also negative pi over 2 to pi over 2, and cosine is 0 to pi. Okay, and yeah, that's pretty much it for today. We'll keep working on inverse trig tomorrow, and yeah, see you then.